In 1930, an ironworker named Frank Dolan fed a family of 5 on $11 a week, while he worked the beams of the Empire State Building for 18 months straight. And every one of those mornings, he carried the same thing in the same dented thermos. That's number 2 on this list. Beside him worked a riveter named Sal Greco, who spent barely 2 cents on breakfast each morning for the full 14 months he was on that job, and never once asked for anything different. That's number 6. These were the meals of the men who built the Empire State Building. The food riveters, connectors, and laborers carried up onto open steel day after day through 1930 and 1931. Subscribe if you want more of these. Let's count down all 10, starting at number 10. 10. Chicory coffee. When real coffee ran short or money ran shorter, men stretched what they had with roasted chicory root, ground down and brewed the same way. No different tools required. It came out darker and a little bitter, almost burnt at the edges, but it still steamed in the cold at 6 in the morning on the sidewalk before the elevator cage went up. A pound of chicory cost about a dime less than coffee itself in 1931, which mattered when a man was feeding 4 mouths on a laborer's wage. Nobody drank it because it tasted better. They drank it because the alternative was drinking nothing at all. 9. Apple pie slice from a lunch cart. At the corner of 5th and 34th, a cart sold pie by the slice for a nickel, wrapped in wax paper, and men bought it on payday the way another man might buy a drink. The filling was nothing more than apples, sugar, and a butter crust, baked the night before and cut into wedges that traveled fine in a coat pocket. Sweet, a little soft, the crust giving way easy under a thumb, for a man on structural steel 100 stories up. That nickel slice was the one purchase all week that wasn't for anybody but himself. It didn't fill a man up. It reminded him he still could enjoy something. 8. Onion and butter sandwich. Not every sandwich on this list needed meat to be worth carrying up 400 feet of open steel. A raw onion, sliced thin, went between 2 pieces of bread with a scrape of butter. Nothing else, nothing fancier, because butter alone ran 28 cents a pound in 1931, and meat cost more than that. It bit back sharp on the way down, the butter softening it just enough to make it bearable, and the smell of onion lingered on a man's hands the rest of the shift. Wives packed it because it was cheap and it was filling, not because anyone claimed to look forward to it. Some men ate it every day for a year and never once asked for anything different. There's a kind of hunger that has nothing to do with an empty stomach. It's what happens when there's no one left to pack the lunch pail at all. Making the sandwich yourself, badly, alone, at 5 in the morning, is still proof you're going up today. 7. Cold pork sandwich. A house that couldn't afford to waste anything didn't waste Sunday's leftover pork. Monday's lunch pail got whatever was left, sliced thin and folded into bread, with nothing added, and by midweek it ate dense and a little dry, the fat gone firm and waxy in the cold. Still, it was meat, and meat mattered on a job that burned through a man's strength by 10 in the morning. Pork ran about 18 cents a pound at the local butcher, cheap enough that a family could stretch one Sunday roast across half a week of lunches. Eating Sunday's dinner again on Wednesday wasn't a complaint in that house. It was proof the week had been planned for. 6. Hard-boiled eggs with a salt twist. This is Sal Greco's meal, barely 2 cents a morning, 2 or 3 eggs boiled the night before and peeled cold at daybreak. A twist of salt folded into a scrap of newspaper was the only seasoning most men bothered with, since salt cost almost nothing, and eggs traveled without breaking in a coat pocket. The yolk came out a little chalky and the white a little rubbery from the cold, but the salt did enough work to make it worth eating standing up in under a minute. A dozen eggs ran around 29 cents through most of 1931. There wasn't anything complicated about an egg, and up on the steel, that was exactly the appeal. 5. Canned peaches. A can and a fork could do the whole job when there was no time for a knife or a fire. Peaches and syrup came sealed in a tin a man could open with a key, and he'd eat them right out of the can, syrup and all, sitting on a beam with his legs hanging over nothing. Sweet in a way nothing else on the job site was, cool and soft against the tongue, a small shock of something bright in the middle of a gray day. A can ran about 15 cents, more than beans but worth it once in a while, and men would trade for it when someone else didn't want theirs. It wasn't dinner, it was the closest thing to dessert a man got that year. Somewhere along the way, feeding yourself stops being a given and starts being a decision, and that shift usually happens quietly. The men on that steel didn't skip the lunch pail, even eating alone, even eating the same thing every day. They packed it anyway, because not packing it meant admitting they'd stopped trying. 4. Sliced salami and bread. Italian families on the crew brought salami into their lunch pails the same way their fathers had brought it across the ocean. Cured, dense, sliced thin enough to fold twice inside a piece of bread, with nothing else needed. Salty and a little fatty, sharp with garlic and pepper, strong enough that a man could taste it through the whole morning shift. A whole salami might run around 40 cents at an Italian grocer in East Harlem. Expensive next to bread and butter, but worth it, because it kept for weeks without spoiling. That sandwich carried a piece of a country a man had left behind up 400 feet of American steel. It didn't need translating. Everyone on the beam knew exactly what it was. 3. Boiled potatoes. Wrapped in paper. Some lunches didn't come from a store at all. They came straight out of the ground the family worked themselves. A few potatoes, boiled the night before and wrapped warm in newspaper, held their heat clear through the walk to the job site, and most of the morning besides. Plain, a little waxy, maybe a pinch of salt if there was any to spare. The warmth of them through the paper sometimes the only warm thing a man's hands touched all morning. Potatoes cost next to nothing when a family grew their own, which is exactly why they showed up in so many lunch pails during those years. A boiled potato wasn't much to look at. It was still breakfast, lunch, and proof a man's family had enough put by to get him through the week. 2. Black coffee from a dented thermos. This is Frank Dolan's meal, $11 a week, 18 months, the same battered thermos every single morning without exception. He'd boil the grounds the night before and pour the coffee in while it was still hot, and somehow it held its heat for hours, even in January wind. It came out bitter and almost burnt by the time he got to the last of it around noon, but it warmed his hands about as much as it woke him up. A pound of grounds ran about 30 cents and made a full week of thermoses for a man watching every dime. It was never really about the taste, it was about having one hot thing waiting for him at the top. Some habits aren't really about the object at all. Frank Dolan didn't carry that thermos for the coffee. He carried it because doing the same small thing 400 mornings straight is its own kind of proof you're still standing. 1. Corned beef sandwich on rye. Corned beef ran about 25 cents a pound from a delicatessen on the Lower East Side, sliced thick and stacked between two pieces of rye with nothing but a smear of mustard, wrapped in wax paper the night before by a wife who knew exactly what her husband was walking into the next morning. Salty and dense, the mustard cutting through the fat. The rye holding together even after hours in a coat pocket 400 feet above the street. For the men who could afford it, this was the sandwich that meant the week had gone all right. Not a luxury, exactly, but not a hardship either. It was the last thing a man tasted before climbing out onto open steel with nothing beneath him but the city. Somehow, that was enough to send him up anyway. Pick one of these, just one. Make it this week. Sit at the table, not the couch, and set an actual place for yourself. Eat it slow enough to taste it. We don't talk much about why a can of peaches meant more than convenience did. A meal you build with your own hands still asks you to care about tomorrow, and that's worth something a drive-through never will be. Tell me in the comments, corned beef or the onion and butter sandwich, which one your grandfather carried up. These meals were never about the food. They were about a person deciding they were still worth feeding.